Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are taking on a high-speed, high-stakes topic that gets surprisingly little specific attention: the danger faced by the motorcycle passenger. Before we even dive into the data, let's maybe set the scene a bit. Just how risky is motorcycle riding generally?
It's inherently risky. I mean, look at the numbers. Motorcyclists make up about 14% of all traffic deaths in the U.S.
14%.
Right.
But they're only, what, like 3% of vehicles on the road?
Exactly. Only 3% of registered vehicles. So statistically, you're looking at someone on a motorcycle being about 28 times more likely to die in a crash compared to, someone in a regular passenger car.
28 times. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, it's a huge risk profile. But like you said, the focus is usually on the driver, the person operating the bike. What we did for this deep dive was dig into data that specifically pulls the focus onto the person sitting behind the driver, the passenger.
Okay.
We explored this really large retrospective study. It used 11 years of data from 2007 through 2017 from the National Trauma Data Bank, the NTDB.
11 years of data. That's substantial.
It is. And it gave us records for 22,855 injured motorcycle passengers. So it's a massive nationwide snapshot of this group that often gets, overlooked in the trauma literature.
Right. So our mission today is really to understand what kind of injuries these passengers are facing, that specific burden.
Yeah.
And critically, what difference does a helmet actually make? We're talking about safety gear that could literally mean life or death.
Absolutely.
And, if you want an immediate aha moment, something that jumped out right away from those 22,000 plus patients, get this, 81.4% of them were female.
81% female.
Yeah. And the median age was 41 years old, middle-aged women. That just completely flips the script on who you typically picture getting hurt in these crashes.
It really does. It fundamentally reframes the risk, doesn't it? Because like we said, the usual driver profile in studies is, a man maybe 25 to 50. But for passengers, it's disproportionately middle-aged females, which, think about it, means a lot of the safety campaigns targeting young male riders, they're completely missing this huge vulnerable group.
That's a massive blind spot. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Like, are these passengers maybe riding with partners who are taking more risks? Or perhaps they're less likely themselves to demand or even be offered the same level of protective gear as the driver.
That's definitely part of the conversation we need to have, because when the study looked at helmet use, the compliance numbers show a real split.
Okay, what did they find there?
So about 57% of the passengers were wearing helmets, which, that's roughly in line with national estimates for helmet use overall.
57% helmeted, so 43% weren't.
Right. The non-helmeted group, 43%. And here's where it gets interesting. That group showed a really clear link to another major risk factor.
Which is?
Intoxication. Among the passengers who were actually tested for substances when they arrived at the hospital, over half, 52.7% of the non-helmeted passengers tested positive for alcohol or illicit drugs.
Over half. Wow. How does that compare to the helmeted group?
It's way higher. For the helmeted passengers who were tested, it was about 37% positive, so 53% versus 37%. It really suggests that not wearing a helmet often goes hand in hand with other high-risk behaviors, possibly for both people on the bike.
That really paints a picture, doesn't it? Sort of two distinct groups. One, taking protective steps. The other, maybe engaging in riskier behavior across the board, which unfortunately leads them to the crash in the first place.
It seems that way.
So, okay, we've got this profile. Often a middle-aged woman may be involved in riskier situations if unhelmeted. What happens when the crash actually occurs? What did the study show about the severity of their injuries?
Well, unsurprisingly, the non-helmeted group faced higher overall severity. They were significantly more likely to have what doctors call major trauma.
Major trauma meaning really serious injuries.
Exactly. We use something called the Injury Severity Score, or ISS. The non-helmeted group had higher median scores, and about 32% of them met the criteria for major trauma, compared to around 27% for the helmeted group.
Okay, so more severe overall. But did the helmet change where they got injured?
Oh, absolutely. This is where you see that critical shift. For the non-helmeted group, the body region hit most often was the head.
The head. Makes sense.
Over 56% of their injuries involved the head. And crucially, they were twice as likely to suffer a severe traumatic brain injury, a TBI.
And we're talking potentially life-altering, even fatal injuries there, right?
Precisely. I mean, the specifics are grim. The non-helmeted group had much higher rates of really catastrophic stuff.
Yeah.
Intracranial hemorrhage bleeding inside the skull was almost double.
Double.
Yeah, 22% versus 12%. Skull fractures were nearly 3 times more common, 17% versus 6%. And face fractures were also double 18% versus 9%.
So without the helmet, the energy just goes straight to the brain and skull.
That's right. It's unimpeded, channels directly into the most vital area. That's why it's so often fatal for non-helmeted riders and passengers in severe impacts.
Okay, so the helmet acts like a crucial shield for the head. But that impact energy, that force, it has to go somewhere.
It does. It gets transferred, and that's what we see with the helmeted patients. The main injury location shifts completely.
Where does it shift to?
To the lower extremities, legs and feet. For the helmeted group, that accounted for about 65% of their injuries.
65%. Mostly legs.
Mostly legs were the most frequently injured part. But here's a really interesting, maybe slightly counterintuitive detail.
Okay.
While the legs got hit most often, the body region that was most severely injured for the helmeted group was actually the chest.
The chest. Wait, so are you saying the helmet, by protecting the head, might indirectly lead to more severe torso injuries? Because you survive long enough for those other forces to take effect.
That's pretty much an interpretation, yeah. The helmet does its job, saves your life from the primary head impact, but the sheer violence of the stop, the deceleration forces, they still have to be absorbed by the body.
Right, like hitting the handlebars or the ground.
Exactly. And the study showed helmeted patients actually had higher rates of certain fractures outside the head. Rib fractures were more common, lower extremity fractures, upper extremity fractures too.
So they survive the head trauma, but then face these really serious, potentially life-threatening forces hitting the torso and limbs.
That seems to be the pattern. Save the head, injure the body.
Which then logically leads us to outcomes.
Mm.
Mortality. How big was the difference there?
It was stark, just looking at the raw numbers. The unadjusted mortality rate for non-helmeted passengers was 6.3%.
Okay, 6.3%. And for helmeted?
It was 3.0%, less than half.
Wow. More than double the death rate without a helmet.
Yeah. For a huge chunk of these injured passengers, the helmet really is the difference between life and death.
And that increased severity and mortality for the non-helmeted group, I assume that translates to more medical resources needed.
Absolutely. It puts a bigger strain on the healthcare system. The non-helmeted patients were significantly more likely to end up in the ICU.
How much more likely?
About 35% needed ICU admission, compared to roughly 28% for the helmeted group. They also needed mechanical ventilation, more often 15% versus 10%.
And brain surgery.
Much more likely to need an urgent craniotomy, yeah. That surgery to relieve pressure on the brain. About 2.2% of non-helmeted patients needed one versus just 0.8% of helmeted patients.
So the costs, both human and financial, are just way higher without a helmet.
Definitely. And when they crunched all the numbers, controlling for everything else, age, intoxication, how badly injured they were elsewhere, the helmet itself stood out.
How much of a difference did it make statistically?
Helmet use alone was associated with a 40% decrease in the odds of death.
40% lower odds of dying just from wearing a helmet.
Yeah. A huge protective effect, independent of other factors.
Which then brings up a crucial question for the doctors in the ER. When someone comes in from a motorcycle crash, what's the biggest red flag? What predicts mortality the most?
Well, TBI, the traumatic brain injury, is the leading cause of death overall, but the single strongest predictor of whether someone would survive or not, it was their neurological status right when they arrived.
Meaning how conscious they were.
Exactly. If the patient came in with a Glasgow Coma Scale score, that's the standard measure of consciousness of less than 9, meaning they were deeply unconscious, not responding meaningfully.
Yeah.
Their odds of dying were just astronomically higher. The odds ratio was over 42.
42 times higher risk of death if you arrive unconscious.
And if you arrive conscious, yes, it was by far the biggest risk factor identified.
Okay. And what was second?
The second strongest predictor was hypotension, basically, shock. If their systolic blood pressure had dropped below 90 millimilli Hg on arrival, that had an odds ratio of about 6.
So arriving unconscious is bad. Arriving in shock is bad. Arriving unconscious and in shock.
The prognosis is incredibly grim, yeah. The body is shutting down, the brain is severely injured. It's very hard to come back from that.
It's terrifying how fast that window closes.
Yeah.
Before we shift to policy, there's that old argument you sometimes hear. The myth, really. Does the helmet increase neck injury risk?
Yes. The neck injury concern has lingered for decades. The idea that the helmet's weight or leverage could, snap your neck.
Right. What did this huge data set say about that?
We can pretty definitively debunk that now. This study found zero association. Helmet use is not linked to an increased risk of neck injuries or cervical spine fractures.
Not at all.
Nope. In fact, cervical spine fractures were actually more common in the non-helmeted group.
More common without a helmet. How does that work?
Well, think about it. If you take a massive fatal blow to the unprotected head, the force is so extreme it often injures the neck structures anyway. The helmet doesn't add risk there, it just prevents the catastrophic head injury itself.
Okay, so that should really put that concern to rest. No reason not to wear one on those grounds.
Absolutely not.
All right, let's talk policy then. Prevention. These findings seem really important, especially when you look at how helmet laws work or don't work across the U.S.
Yeah, the legislative landscape is, well, it's a mess. You've only got 18 states plus D.C. with universal helmet laws, meaning everyone, driver and passenger, has to wear one.
Only 18. So the majority of states don't require it for everyone.
Right. You've got 29 states with partial laws. And the problem is, these partial laws often only cover younger riders, say under 18 or 21, or, crucially for our discussion, they specifically do not require passengers over a certain age to wear a helmet.
So the law in many places effectively exempts the very group this study found is most often injured, the middle-aged female passenger.
Exactly. It's a massive policy gap. The law basically says, hey, if you're over 21 and just riding on the back, you're fine with that protection, which this data clearly shows is not true.
So this study gives actual ammunition for changing that.
It really should. This provides nationwide data focused specifically on passengers that can and should inform public health campaigns. We need campaigns that stop focusing only on the stereotypical young male driver.
And start targeting these middle-aged female passengers directly.
Yes. Educate them about their specific vulnerability, about that 40% reduction in death risk from wearing a helmet, and push for policy changes that actually protect them.
Definitely. But we also have to acknowledge, based on what you said earlier, that the helmet isn't a magic bullet for all injuries. Yeah.
Absolutely not. It addresses the #1 killer, the head injury. But that high rate of chest and limb injuries we saw in the helmeted survivors, that tells us we can't stop there.
We need better gear beyond the helmet.
For sure. The goal isn't just saving lives, it's minimizing morbidity, those long-term debilitating injuries. The fact that helmeted survivors are frequently suffering severe torso and extremity trauma highlights a real need for advances and wider adoption of other protective gear.
Like what? Armored jackets.
Yeah, proper protective clothing, specialized boots, and especially things like motorcycle airbag jackets or vests. Those are designed specifically to inflate and cushion the torso during a crash. That's really the next frontier for improving overall passenger safety.
Okay, so let's wrap this up. Let's quickly recap the main takeaways from this deep dive for everyone listening. What are the key points?
Okay, 3 main things, I think. First, the person most likely to be seriously injured as a motorcycle passenger isn't who you might think. It's overwhelmingly middle-aged females, over 80% in this huge study.
Right. Point 1, the demographic is surprising. What's 2?
Second, the helmet makes a massive difference. It fundamentally shifts injuries away from the head, dramatically cutting the risk of death by about 40%, according to this analysis.
Okay. Helmets work drastically. And third?
Third, when an injured passenger gets to the hospital, the single biggest factor predicting whether they'll survive is their level of consciousness on arrival. That Glasgow Coma Scale score under 9 is a really ominous sign.
Unconsciousness on arrival is the biggest predictor of mortality.
Got it. So if we connect this all together, maybe leave you with a final thought. Consider this. We know the population of older motorcycle riders is actually growing.
Okay.
And we know that increased age just generally leads to worse outcomes after trauma bones are more fragile, recovery is harder. This study found spinal fractures happen in about 1 in 5 passengers overall.
20%. That's quite high.
It is. So knowing that older passengers are potentially more common now, and they're more fragile, and spine injuries are already frequent, what should the healthcare system be doing differently? Beyond just promoting helmets, what advanced screening or specific precautions should ERs prioritize immediately when an older injured motorcycle passenger comes through the door?
How should they adapt triage or treatment based on those specific age-related risks, even if the initial injuries seem focused elsewhere?
Exactly. How do we get ahead of those potential complications in that specific, growing, vulnerable group? That's something worth mulling over.